Hello and welcome to the EV Cafe Takeaway, that podcast focused on the zero-emission future that we all hope for. Every week I get joined by one of the wonderful members of the team from the EV Cafe, and this week we couldn't find anybody, so John stepped up. Hello, John.
I was looking forward to it until now.
Well, I'll teach you to be mean to me off camera. Anyway, there we go. Moving on, we are joined by one of the innovators, pioneers and collaborators of our industry. And this week is no exception. A recent announcement may well have given away who our next guest is, and it is Tom Pearson from CPD, the commercial director. So, Tom, good morning and welcome. It's morning, just we've given away when we're recording. We're not supposed to. It's supposed to be generic, of course. But hey, it's the morning, bright and cheery. That's why we all sound so wonderful. But Tom, welcome. Welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about who you are and also a little bit about CPD, just to kick us off, and then we can get right into it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. So, as you say, Tom Pearson, Commercial Director at CPD Bodies, joined 13 months ago now into the organisation, as we are really going through that step change and acceleration from being what could be considered a relatively small business to becoming a decent medium-sized enterprise and on to being a large organisation. We are driving that through our people. We are driving that through the systems that we have onboarded, and we are driving that through our processes, which you guys very kindly come and took stock of the other week, which was great. And I'm sure we'll get into some of that in a bit more detail later on too. In terms of CPD, we are one of the leading commercial vehicle manufacturers and converters in the UK to date. So we run roughly 3,000 to 5,000 conversions per year through our workshops. That variability clearly dependent on what's going on in the markets at any time. But we also retail chassis as well from a number of OEMs. We hit 500 chassis sales last year, with a view that we grow that as part of our acceleration strategy too.
Fantastic. I mean, John and I have personally experienced your business, and I think one of the questions that stands out for many people, because obviously we're on a that podcast focused on that zero emission future that we all hope for, but what is it that makes you and CPD care about this transition? What's your engine room for this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the two are slightly different, by the way. So from a business perspective, again, we talked on the video last week or the week before maybe. The engine for this is twofold. So one of those is evolution within the marketplace. We know we have to strive for a greener and more sustainable future. We know that from an EV perspective, the technology is significantly ahead of where it was 10, 15 years ago as it started to emerge in markets. We know that technology is here to stay. So despite all the myths that still remain, all the challenges and blockers that people still perceive, whether that's price point, infrastructure, payload concerns, and I say myths because they are being busted well and truly. We are seeing that evolution, which is great. We know there's still steps to be taken and kind of technologies to evolve, and that will happen too. But we also know EV is one of many emerging technologies, and there will be other solutions that come to the table too. So from a CPD perspective, we want to, not just need to, but want to embrace that full spectrum and offering to our customers, because as our customer needs evolve, so too do the solutions that we put on the table. From a really personal perspective, we are all becoming and have become more conscious around the planet and where we are and what we want to do. I've got a 7-year-old boy, and I've got to think about what does his future look like, and very much do. We launched a partnership as part of our sustainability strategy with Auditel earlier in the year, and we very much talked about this is an individual as well as a corporate responsibility to deliver on sustainability, and that can be recycling things at home. It can be embracing, EV technology or new sustainable technologies from a vehicle perspective, and everything on that spectrum in between. So I've been fortunate enough to land at CPD in an SME who is agile enough and forward thinking enough to allow me to bring some of that personality to the business as well, and ultimately allow for that drive forward under Cathal's leadership.
If you operate a fleet of cars or vans, you'll know electric is the future. Transitioning to EVs can appear daunting, but with Europcar, it's effortless. Our long-term EV rentals eliminate the upfront costs, contract commitments and uncertainty. Instead, you'll get total flexibility, a wide choice of cars and vans, and Europe Car's expert support. So, make the switch without the stress and experience Europe Karma. Search Europe Car Business.
So the reality is you could have taken your toolkit of things that you have learned throughout your life to any business, because you are, a top drawer business leader. Why CPD? What was it about Cathal and the business there that made you say, I want to go and invest my time and effort in that business specifically?
Well, firstly, that's very kind of you, John, so thank you. But yeah, I think from a CPD perspective, it is that vision. So it's falling across I've already touched on it this morning, but falling across a small business who have aspirations to be something bigger, who also have a solid platform and reputation in market and that appetite. And the difference between an SME going on that journey and, say, a large corporate is absolutely that agility. So we have a very small, lean leadership team who are very forward-thinking, are very agile in that decision-making process, do understand the market, and there's a lot of experience that sits in that leadership team, specifically within automotive, given that's not my background, who I foresaw as enablers and absolutely are enablers. In terms of that growth and development. And that's the exciting piece for me. It's about taking a business on a journey in collaboration with some of the great people, enjoying that process, but ultimately building a stronger business as a result too.
And you mentioned that we'd visited and 13 months in, it would appear that you have created something very special there in terms of the vision, not only the vision, but actually delivering some improvements and change, which will drive the business forward. Can you talk to us about some of the things that you're doing on site, right from, you mentioned processes and the things, how you do stuff, right through to where you get your energy from and what preparations you're making to deliver even more?
Absolutely. So I'm not going to take any of the platitudes for what we do from a process perspective, because we know that's Dave Maguire's kind of brainchild, our operations director. But simple changes we have made in the past in terms of moving from batch build to the line concept and having those vehicles move along with man and materials delivered specifically to work on individual job elements just gives us an efficiency and scale to our operation that far exceeds what we had in place before, and maybe is more typical in the industry in terms of surrounding one vehicle with products and individuals. I think also from a process perspective, we are mindful around safety. We absolutely kind of make sure that is first and foremost in everything we do. You've seen the workshops, you've seen us picking bolts and rivet ends up off the floor. And been relatively meticulous in terms of our approach to that, because it has to be a priority. And it's not what's interesting about CPD is you won't see us talk about safety first as a agenda item, because it's an accepted part of our culture that safety is paramount. We don't need to kind of push that on either. In terms of some of those other developments, and certainly where we draw energy from, we currently utilize solar on some of our buildings. We want to embrace that in a more meaningful and larger scale way too. So we are currently developing a workshop on the last parcel of available land we have on our site that will be fully solar powered. We'll have battery electric storage in. We'll also be dedicated to EV builds, by the way, and conversions and charging, but will not draw from grid. That is our commitment on that particular building. That we have a self-sustaining infrastructure and worlds that takes natural resource and allows us to deliver, sustainable vehicles moving forwards from that workshop too.
And, do you know, I just love this. It's brilliant ambition to kind of set yourselves up to, because one of the problems that meant much across industry and particularly commercial vehicles really struggling with where do we get our energy from, where do we get, we don't want to impact the grid, we don't want to pay £1 million to get a grid upgrade and all of these kinds of things. So we're seeing this kind of challenge across the industry, but you guys are solving it. And just as I kind of do a little bit of research, it's clear that you want to extend your reach. You yourself, Tom, are a board member for the hire association and also the converters group, and it's that kind of leadership, that involvement in the wider community that excites me. Talk to me about that a little bit and how you're collaborating with others to really move the industry forward.
Yeah, so you mentioned there kind of being chairperson for the bodybuilders group for VBRA. Really important in terms of bringing together, I wish, John. But really important in terms of bringing together like-minded individuals who face very, very similar challenges. That organisation in particular is full of very similar sized businesses. Some are a little bit more in their infancy. Some of those are a little bit more evolved from us, but it is a collaborative environment. And I think there are two reasons for getting involved with that from my perspective. One of those comes back to the learning and continuing to evolve my presence in industry and my understanding of industry. But I'm also a huge believer in collaboration between sectors and industries, which probably brings me quite nicely to the Hire Association Europe involvement, with my background being more plant and construction based. There's an opportunity for me to have an impact with previous skills and knowledge from that world, but also to help that sector understand how much more evolved automotive is in some respects. So, if we look at construction and the way that their products are evolving, you see the significant investments from somebody like a JCB and Lord Bamford with their electric and hydrogen offerings into markets. But there are very few others who followed suit. There's a few offerings in the powered access world and a little bit in power generation. But actually, what learns can we take from that industry, and what learns can that industry take from automotive too? So being sat on that supply chain board is critical in terms of, again, that collaboration piece and just driving everybody's view forwards in how we deliver sustainability sustainably.
And Tom, I've got to ask, because not everybody wants to do this, because it's possibly altruistic. It's not core time for your day. You're going out of the business to go and so obviously you're being released to go and do this, first of all, from CPD, which is great. But why do you care? What is the engine? I don't mean in the last couple of years. I know we heard about, why do you care about sustainability? But what is this? What's the driver for you that sort of is down there somewhere, that engine room that gets you out of bed each day and kind of doing this sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think I can summarize that quite nicely. And it's a legacy piece. It comes back to a really individual level. I'd like to make an impact. And that can be an impact on an individual through coaching and training and development. And I've been there and I've delivered that, and I've loved that. And, I'm still very close with some ex-colleagues that have come on leaps and bounds and are doing very well in their own right, but appreciate that there's been some coaching and development from me there. It comes to being a role model for my son. As a single father, I want to be that good example to him and really leave a lasting legacy with him on where I've impacted, whether that's through his learning or, his kind of local environment. I've been a school governor in previous lives too. Whether that's just how he behaves and conducts himself in future. And as much as he makes me proud, I want to be able to make him proud as a father figure too. And I think in wider industry, it is that piece now where John's touched on it previously and again earlier today. I've built up an amount of experience. I would certainly not class myself as an expert, but I've built up an amount of experience through multiple roles and life experiences. And actually, if I can impart some of that somewhere else and have a larger impact on industry, whatever that industry might be, I'm really keen to do that. And that's where some of that fire and passion comes from. And it's where some of that driving change, and you very kindly talk about kind of setting the vision for CPD in particular as well. That's where that fire is lit and comes from. It's about having a concept and going and delivering on that. For the betterment of others. And I appreciate that appears kind of a bit of an egotistical type statement, but that's not the place it comes from at all. It comes from a relatively humble place. But it is about, improvement.
Have you always been like that, Tom? Let's go back to your early formative years. Have you always been that sort of person who was the visionary and the leader and the person who would know their mind, or have you grown into this mature human being who's got not only your own interests, but your families, your teams, and society at heart?
Yeah, I mean, I was a shy, retiring wallflower at school. You know, I was the kid at the back of the
Really?
class.
Genuinely?
Oh, absolutely. You know, back of the class, kept my hand down. You know, relatively focused on schoolwork, but by no means a swot at that point. But you know, I think the thing that drives me and has allowed me to grow into that is I've always been a voracious reader. So I will read somewhere between 100 and 150 books a year.
Wow.
And I just digest that information and store that information. And I don't have a particular kind of subset either. I'll read, you know, fiction, non-fiction. I'm that guy who, when I'm sat in your reception area, is reading your business's information ready for the meeting ahead. Not out of good sales habit, but just because I like ingesting and devouring information. So that has allowed me to become a lot more confident and potentially capable, and grow into kind of the person I am today, to kind of coin your phrase, John.
So the answer is in the books then. So you have learned, you absorb knowledge. How have you turned what you know into something which is clearly very engaging for the people that work with you? Because we saw lots of kindness coming back towards you from your teams. People speak very highly of you. A lot of people know stuff, but there aren't very many leaders in life. How have you learned to lead?
I think for me, that was probably founded in sport. So I was very, very active across multiple sports as a child, played rugby to a relatively high level. So, you know, being part of that team and part of that decision-making process as part of those teams too is a really good grounding for kind of future piece as well. And then I think beyond that, like most of us learn, it's trial and error, right? We haven't got everything right every time. We speak to somebody in slightly the wrong way or the wrong tone or the wrong approach, and something isn't delivered or the reaction is poor. And it's having the ability to take that feedback on board and do something differently. Same as when we've had negative experiences. And I've been both fortunate and unfortunate to have some really high caliber leaders I've worked for, and some very poor ones too. And you understand quite quickly what kind of leader would I like to be. And it won't surprise you to understand I'd lean more towards those that I see as good, positive role models and leaders.
Do you know what, Tom? It's interesting talking to you. You're very articulate and you have a very measured response. It seems that you are very clear in the way you think. Now, I'm probably going to reflect a little bit on myself here, but so I noticed that you did a degree in psychology, but particularly leading into mental health, and there was a sort of thing there. Now, I know from my own personal experience that you know, I had lots of counselling and you know, had a real interest in psychology. My son did psychology at A level, and there is something around like we kind of like to get under the nuts and bolts of the brain. Have you done a lot of self-work in that process? And were you dealing with, I mean, I don't want to get too personal, or as personal as you like, but were you dealing with stuff through that time? Did it really help you to kind of really understand yourself so that you can articulate yourself really clearly in the way that you're doing?
Yes, is the short answer.
Moving on then.
Yeah. At the risk of getting really personal, and look, you know, I wouldn't volunteer this if I didn't want kind of public domain and to share this, but I think it's important in terms of understanding that formative piece for me. So I didn't enjoy a good childhood, as you would describe it. I had a fairly estranged relationship with my father, although I lived in the same house with him. It wasn't a close relationship. So I left home at 15. You know, I finished my GCSEs, didn't finish my AS levels at the time then, ended up moving to Manchester. I worked on evenings to fund the flat that I lived in, and I went to college during the day. So I put myself through kind of AS and A level before even thinking about returning home. At the same time, I struggled with a little bit of depression, and actually that is one of the catalysts. So funnily enough, you mentioned your son doing psychology at A level. That's exactly what I did. That was the route I took. And through doing it psychology at A level, really focused in on clinical as well as mental health. So talking about neurodivergence, etc., which is what sparked a little bit of a passion in me from a psychology perspective and ultimately led to me going to Bangor University to do that. Whilst I was at Bangor University, my autism diagnosis came to the fore. I also have ADHD, so I'm quite passionate around neurodivergent kind of audiences too. And there's some work that I do separately from a fundraising perspective, and I'd like to have more of a voice in that world around my own experiences. And this fallacy, I guess, I'm sat here quite proud of myself as a commercial director in an organization with a neurodivergent condition. And there's had to be an amount of resilience that's come with that, and maybe similar to yourself, Paul, kind of gone through that counseling route. And I think the ability to self-reflect as part of that process, that counseling process, as well as kind of life challenge process, allows you to identify really quickly around what do I control and what do others have the ability to control in of themselves and not of me. And I think that lends itself to kind of that articulation. So I have a very strong sense of self and understanding of self. Again, don't get it right all the time. But that would not have happened had some of those other experiences not taken place and that learning journey taken place.
Tom, I've got to say, it's quite strange. I feel quite emotional right now because I thank you for your candor, for being that honest. I share a lot of your experience. There's a couple of podcasts out there, if you and people will know that have listened. But I feel you should feel proud of yourself, and I think to have gone the process that you've gone to navigate that journey early doors. I didn't get this sorted until I was over 40, with a divorce under my belt and a number of other, kind of stuff going on. I'm undiagnosed on any of those other forms. I've just never bothered because I just live with the various things, But I just think, we need more leaders like you that have kind of taken control, have navigated those difficult early years, because many of us have those experiences, and then we're able to kind of bring that leadership before. But what I love is that you're wanting to give back, and to sort of speak into the these other industry board roles, but also speaking into autism, ADHD, mental health, all of those things. You've taken incredible action. And I really respect that. I don't have that study gene in me at all. But it is really quality. And I know John was to come in because, John has had a very, very similar experience. John.
I wasn't actually going to bore everybody with it yet again, but I've got autism and ADHD, recently diagnosed some 8 months ago, and I went through a period of real grief, actually, about the life I'd led, to the point when I discovered that the things that I had done that I wasn't proud of were frustration, not anger. And that was very interesting for me, and I realised that I'd damaged some people along the way and lost people, good people. And I've learned over the years to trust people with that information. And Paul is one of the people I was first able to confide in. Do you have a good support network, friends, people that help keep you grounded, if you like, and not too in your own head? Because sometimes it's very easy, certainly for me, to have the overwhelming feeling that I'm not good enough and that I can't deliver. Do you have people who can lift you back up?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think, again, at the risk of being too personal, potentially, there's times where that hasn't been the case, and you make some really, really critical life decisions at that point, and can also go to some really dark places. And I'm sure I'm speaking to a much wider audience here in terms of people who've experienced exactly that same thing. and it's a bit of a cliche, but it's important those people know they are not alone. You know, many of us have been there. Many of us have had to navigate that. And just as a slight aside, before I come back to your kind of question, John, you know, there is a great phrase from Tom Hanks who talks about this too shall pass. And that has really carried me since hearing that around actually, you know, most experiences, good and bad, are relatively short-lived in our relatively short time on this earth. But if we can survive some of those things, we can pretty much face anything. But I think what you're talking more broadly to is that imposter syndrome, that idea that why am I here? Why am I trusted? Why am I seen by you guys as a leader worthy of talking to today? You know, why am I respected by peers, etc. So yeah, again, the short answer was yes. I do have a great support network. I'm very fortunate that I have a great relationship with my mum. Always have done. She is the one who taught me to be a little bit more social rather than antisocial. She is the one who taught me to be a little bit more patient than not. And we still share a great relationship today. We'll talk a few times a week, and you know, a really, really personal level about things. I also have a great support in my partner, albeit relatively new relationship within the last year. But you know, I was quite forthcoming around my own challenges and shortcomings. And she has embraced that incredibly well. Again, I would suggest my son does that for me too. He absolutely buoys me up and knows when I need that support, just as, you know, I support him, which is great. And then from a work perspective, I clearly have a relatively extensive network of ex-colleagues and current colleagues who are great in that respect too. I think the one thing that I have had a real absence of through my entire career is a quality mentor. So I think a lot of the things that I have, I don't think, and I don't, it's not a lot of, the things that I have done and achieved have been driven by that fire that I have inside me, have been driven by me wanting to improve me and the people around me in terms of the absence of that. But you know, you roll with that, right? You kind of take that and you go, and I enjoy that process. One of the things that we didn't touch on before, sorry, just after my psychology degree, and whether we get into this or not in terms of kind of, you know, best role I've ever had, because clearly I'm enjoying what I'm doing now and delivering on that. But immediately following university, I actually taught neurodivergent children. That's what I went into. I worked in a specialist inclusion unit just on the outskirts of Leeds, which is where I was born and bred, and did that for 12 months. And it was the most rewarding job I will ever have in my life. It was the most underpaid job that I ever had in my life. And the only reason I changed careers was to move back out of the house again. Been a postgraduate, but you know, hats off to that audience too, in terms of being underappreciated, undervalued, because the work that he's done in terms of the grounding for those young people and individuals, as I say, there's nothing more rewarding than that.
It's often said that people who are neurodivergent have superpowers. Do you subscribe to that way of looking at who you are? And if you do, what's your superpower?
So I didn't for a long time. And interestingly, you talked about kind of your overwhelming first reaction being almost grief from your perspective, John. You know, mine was relief. It was almost the opposite. It was almost I know that there are times where I haven't, and to some extent still do feel I don't fit in. And actually that is just a part of me, and I can accept that. You know, and that's also okay. And that's not about somebody else thinking that's okay. That's about me knowing that it's okay. And that's more important. That's a lot more important. Yeah, in terms of superpowers, I mean, you'd argue the reading piece, right? It's almost kind of Rain Man type material at that point. Yeah, so I couldn't say that's not the case. But, you know, whether I class it as a superpower or not, I'm aware that certainly in the last 10 years, I've had this great ability to set out a strategic vision and onboard people to that. Yeah. And actually that is something that I have found lacking in my previous work roles. So Would I describe that as a superpower? No, but is it something that I am capable of to a great level? Again, trying to remain relatively humble. Then yes, I would suggest so.
Yeah. Oh, you've got many superpowers. Cool.
True humility is about trying to articulate the reality, right? Without, kind of, I don't know, without blowing smoke up your own backside, as it were. And I think you're doing that extremely well. So take heart from that. But I just that phrase, "this too shall pass." So I guess I went through my childhood with the phrase, "somebody else somewhere's got it worse off than me." That was one thing that kind of, it's deflection, right? It's not real healing or anything like that. It was just it was a coping mechanism. But I think latterly, I'm mindful of an advert that might have passed you by because you're a little younger than us. I say us because John and I are very similar in age. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. And it was about a little thing that you could knock every which way, but you couldn't make it. Yeah, how good. Thank goodness. And for all of you out there, you're going to have to Google it if you're too young.
I'm going to say possibly showing my age there, Paul, but yeah.
But it's great. And I love, just as you were talking there, how that vulnerability to be open with your now partner and also your son to an extent. And I've found that actually being really open with my kids has really helped both them and me, to be real about, the journey that we go on in life. And talking of the journey, where do you see this journey growing? And obviously we're talking in the context of CPD at the minute. But do you have those really big, what are they called? BHAGs, big hairy goals, that are something that you want to see for your future, but also for the future of CPD. So talk to us about both of those.
Yeah. So I think, I joined CPD with a view that there was a 5-year next part of the journey. So that's not just about commitment to the business at a personal level. That's about, in 5 years, the business feeling very different to the day it did when I entered the organization. So we've been quite clear and publicized fairly widely so far as well, in terms of what that vision looks like. We are roughly a 25 to 37 million pound turnover organization, depending on what day of the week it is and what the weather's doing. But we have aspirations to grow beyond 100 million in the next 3 to 5 years. An amount of that will come organically before the naysayers say, hold on, that's 27% compound growth year on year. And I know this, which is quite an ambition.
Of course you do.
So I'm not naive to that fact. We will absolutely do an amount of that organically, and that will be offering alternative products and services within the core deliverables of our business. So beyond conversion and chassis product. We've already started doing that. We've engaged in that journey. We launched CPD Finance. We've launched CPD Insurance. We've launched CPD Fuel Services. We have CPD SMR to come later this year, which will probably come at a similar time to us launching our sustainability report. But all of these products, services, all of these shifts in language and focus around safety, sustainability, innovation. And I say shifts not because we weren't doing it before, but we're a lot more vocal about what we're doing now, are all part of that journey and that onboarding. And where we have been an SME business that have serviced other SMEs and some large rental organizations, as our scope and scale grows, our appeal will grow too, quite naturally. And then quite rightly, because we've got the capability today to deliver a lot more than we do. We will then start looking at M&A. And as soon as we get into the M&A world, the merger and acquisition world, things become even more exciting. It's like a gear change yet again. We start to look at being multi-location rather than just pigeonholed up in the northeast of England, despite having a national spread. We start to look at what are those other products, services, businesses that really synergize with what we do at our core in terms of vehicle conversion. And actually, we get a wider voice quite naturally with some of those engagements and involvements we had. And this kind of comes full circle to why have we engaged with EV Cafe? Why do we engage with VBRA? Why do we engage with HAE and, SMMT and these other organizations? Because we want to lead by example, but also be led by some of the best practice that does exist if we're not the ones that are delivering that. And it's a really interesting point, reflecting on a comment made earlier around, business. There are some businesses out there who aren't kind of engaging on a sustainability journey as yet, for example, and there will be a time where that's mandated. It is not strictly mandated now, so we are making that active choice. But I also kind of want to lay down that gauntlet, right? We are an SME who isn't a multi-billion-pound multinational organization, and we're doing this. So why are other businesses not? We found a way to do this. We found a way to deliver it in a meaningful, scalable, and cost-effective way. And if we can help be the guiding light for some of that development as part of that journey, again, at a CPD level and at a personal level, why would we not want to be?
Having vision is one thing. Having the energy to deliver it is quite another. And you've already talked about 150 books read in a year. You've already talked, I think it was before we started recording, about having done a Tough Mudder and being able to run, 5K in the mud and, no bother at all. And you could easily do 15K. You are somebody who, whatever you do, you seem to want to excel at it. How do you fill the cup of Tom so that you're able to pour and support other people? Because you seem to have boundless energy.
Well, it doesn't always feel like it, but I appreciate that. How do I fill the cup? So, it comes back to that well-being piece, and we've not talked too much around the well-being element, but it comes back to getting the balance, right? I guess the old adage is kind of work hard, play hard. But, from my perspective, in terms of filling that cup, it's that exercise, it's that going for a run, it's the lifting a few weights, but not being a gym bunny. It's the getting down to the Derbyshire Peak District. It's the getting up to the Lake District and getting up mountains, whether that's alone or with family, friends, whatever it might be. And that is the top up. There is always, certainly from an autistic perspective, there is always this challenge around burnout. There is always this challenge on, what element is masking and when do you need to put that down and genuinely have a rest. And, ironically, I'm somebody who sleeps somewhere between 5 and 6 hours a night, and that kind of does me. And then every so often I'll have a bit of a hibernation and top up on a weekend with a lazy morning, but they're relatively rare. It is just about keeping going, and that downtime is actually probably, for other people, a bit of an uptime. Yeah, but that I guess that the passion piece around fire in the work environment is seeing things to fruition, right? It's delivering. There will be for some of those that know me and maybe some who don't, but might wish to connect after this podcast. And I'm more than open to that happening, by the way. I did a quick summary of the things that have been achieved in the last year at CPD, and that list is fairly extensive. But to be able to look back on that and reflect quite proudly is the thing that keeps that cup, that chalice full around, okay, brilliant, what's next? What are we going to do and deliver? And I say we because it is very much team effort. There is a part I play in a number of different roles and projects for sure. But it is back to that delivering things with other people.
You've introduced me to a concept that I hadn't ever thought about, which is this temporary unmasking. So just to explain, when you're autistic and neurodivergent, sometimes we wear a mask to pretend that we are like everybody else, because frankly we're not, and we deal with situations differently. And Tom and I may differ in how we deal with certain situations, despite the fact that we are the same, we are completely different. And so we take off a mask when we are able to be ourselves. I had thought, and I have unmasked completely, so I am unlikely to mask and to play the game the way people want me to play it. I'm just me. And if you like me, great. If you don't, go away. You talk about this temporary unmasking. So you play a game sometimes where you're able to be what society expects. And then there's a time where you take the mask off and you're able to be yourself. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, I would say that, despite the steps that have been made in neurodivergence becoming more accepted and more spoken about and more culturally relevant. And I think to your point, Paul, there are a number of people who aren't labeled or defined, as it were. And that's okay too, by the way. It's all about how confident people feel or what process people want to go through. But there is still, certainly in the corporate workplace, an expectation that people act and behave in certain ways. And, that's more so in a sales environment, which is where I've come from. So, networking events, absolute nightmare for me. But can I do them? Can I engage with people? Can I talk with people? Our interactions in today demonstrates that I absolutely can. But I think it's a really important point you make, that those times where I am refilling the cup for me, whether that's a little bit of exercise on my own or going for a walk, is where that mask comes off. I can put that down. It doesn't feel so heavy. I don't have to be so mindful around who I am and how I'm perceived. And I think there is more of me that comes to every situation today than there was 20 years ago. And I think some of that just comes with age. I think that attitude around like me or lump me does come with age, genuinely. You're a lot more bothered about how people see you and reflect on you and how you present yourself. Does that mean I'm going to suddenly jump up on a table and go a little bit wild only after a few beers in the workplace, But yeah, there is definitely still times where that prim, proper, calm facade is at counter to what's going on inside. And again, I've got to a point where that is okay. It doesn't have to affect anybody else. It's for me to manage. And if I can't manage it, I have my coping strategies to be able to do that and release that at an appropriate time.
I know that you are going to make a huge difference to people, and being as honest and open as you have been is a really wonderful thing to do. And I'll say it now because I know Paul will ask me to wrap up at some point. But thank you very much for doing that. Because, people get tired of hearing the same old voices saying the same old things. I'm a bit like a dripping tap about the whole neurodivergence thing. But for you to come here, and we didn't have this as part of our questioning, and to be so open takes courage. And I hope it will help others to be equally brave and to have a think about themselves and how they can take great strength from you.
I appreciate that. And look, it's not without its challenges, right? There have been some workplaces that have been great in terms of that sharing of diagnosis. But to share a very quick adage, and I purposely won't mention the business for obvious reasons. But when I was first diagnosed and took the decision to share that diagnosis with my then line manager, I was laughed at. And that really set the rod for me around where do you share that information, where do you not? And, rightly or wrongly, there's a number of organizations that I've not disclosed to based on that experience. Actually, now, I've published this quite publicly in terms of my LinkedIn profile contains, the tagline that I'm autistic, ADHD. And similar to yourself, John, I won't hide from that. I embrace who I am, and quite rightly so. Just as everybody should, neurodivergent or neurotypical.
Totally.
I think the stranger phrase in the two that you just used is neurotypical, because I'm not even sure that it's a spectrum for a reason, and are we all on it? But somewhere, and I have not taken the time. It's funny. There's some things in life that I'm just not concerned to go and chase, and that is what for me is just not one of them.
What works for you?
I recognize that I have a lot of flaws and a lot of things that and I can kind of reflect on certain things that might be, but I just think for me, and it is, I think to your point, it is very different for everybody. Everybody's got to make a personal choice on that. I've got plenty of things in my youth. For years, I had to declare them on my CV, and I have been laughed out of a job interview before, because of certain things I had to tell them at the time, and So yeah, I think it's interesting. But I think one word I wanted to pick up on, and it was something that you mentioned that is, and it really resonated with me. And I think it's because of the whole father figure thing. We lack or mourn the lack of mentors, and I think mentors. And I, as a 56-year-old person, really mourn the lack of an older mentor, that an older, wiser person that would absolutely champion me. I said wiser.
Hello. Floor. Okay.
But, that's somebody that can come along that is 100% for you. And there are some really great people that I have in my life and that I genuinely love, and we sort of move along. John's one of those people. And that you can be yourself with, you can be open with and stuff like that. But it's that mentoring, that active input into your life from somebody that's been on the journey and understands your challenges, but also has been through that. And I think that's, in us wanting to be that for others, that's good. But it really ought to be at every stage of life, don't you think?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's interesting because there are clearly some, as you say, so the not necessarily an agenda set for today, but some thought-provoking questions for today. And one of those was, who's been kind of a mentor for me? And there has been an absence of that, by the way. So I wasn't one of these people that had even a sports star kind of up on the wall. There've been people that have come. So Clive Woodward has played a fairly important kind of role in my life in terms of aspirational leader, clearly from a kind of my rugby background as well. But I think kind of one of the most impactful people in my life has been a throwaway comment made by a tutor when I was at college, who taught specifically about wisdom. So she said, wisdom isn't about knowing or having the answer. It's about knowing where to find the answer. And kind of almost full cycle, that's probably driven some of that appetite for reading material for me. Yeah. In that broad spectrum of knowledge comes from, it's kind of been driven by that statement. But I think you're absolutely right, Paul, in terms of, lack of mentors, both for people, coming into the workplace now, but certainly for those that have been in the workplace for a long time. And we see this kind of rise of the executive coach, which is great, but not massively bought into either. But it's also a difficult thing to do, right? If you are not predisposed to reflecting on yourself and taking feedback because you are at a pinnacle in an organization, for example, certainly at leadership level, you think, well, hold on, I must have done quite a lot right to get and to be able to afford that position. Therefore, what have I got to learn? And that mindset shift, again, is a relatively individual one. It's either, no, I don't have anything to learn and I'm fine and I'll stay in my lane, or a broader, softer approach around, we all have things to learn and we should embrace that. And I think, one of the things that, as I reflect on lack of mentor for myself, is something that I begin to take up, and clearly there's only so many hours in a day, but the ability to really find somebody that I could benefit if possible and help develop. And I think that's very much been my approach in previous roles with the teams I've led. There's an element of that that will exist today as well. And I think that comes back to that coaching development. Why do people see me in a positive light? And, that ability to adapt to different people too, and support their learning journeys. But I think, maybe one for another time, but a whole topic around mentorship in industry and in leadership. And, we maybe pick that up as a webinar or something, for example. And
what a good idea.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting topic to dive into in a little bit more detail if we had more time.
Heck yeah.
Let's make more time. One thing I'm fascinated to understand from you, Tom, is the sense of joy. I get no satisfaction from anything I ever do, ever, genuinely. So I finish a task and my next question is, what now? So it's my life is a constant sense of, I have something more to do. Let's go and do it. I don't celebrate wins. I don't really feel joy at having completed stuff. Do you have a sense of joy? And if so, what was the last thing that brought you joy other than the Tough Mudder and your son, who you're clearly very proud of?
Yeah, that's funny enough. I was going to reference Tough Mudder, so I do experience joy to extremes. I mean, I'm known to get quite giddy about some things for sure, which isn't a bad thing when I'm relatively poised most of the time. But I can get giddy, believe it or not. I'm a little bit like you in terms of the question is always what's next, and actually quite frequently that what's next comes before I've finished the what now. So I end up with several projects on the go at one time, and ultimately I am not the person who starts a project and doesn't deliver on it, but you end up spinning many plates at the majority of the time, which again kind of helps fill my cup to an extent and having that variety. The joy certainly comes from finishing some of those. The last time specifically that we did that, so we didn't talk about kind of Tough Mudder came off the back of having been on a canal boat for the last week. First time we'd done that, we did that as a forming family of 5. So me and my son, my partner, and her 2 boys. And we neither of us had ever done anything like that before. But I'll tell you what, that change of pace from going full on 5 days a week, in some cases 7 days a week, thinking about work, sometimes more than 24 hours a day it feels, and trying to do that, and been forced onto a narrowboat that can't travel more than 4 miles an hour no matter how much Tom revs the engine, is actually, there's a real sense of joy about just that almost immediate halt and slow down, and just being able to appreciate. You probably picked up, I'm a big fan of nature, so the ability to be forced to appreciate nature and that change of pace just allowed me, again, possibly to your temporary unmasking comment, just to slow down and actually really enjoy that in a physical way, but in a really mental way as well, in terms of the R&R, and being able to come back and enter, the madness of this podcast this morning.
I think there's a compliment in there, isn't there, Paul?
It really feels that you've fully grasped life and understand yourself. I when I was a kid, I was in the National Youth Theatre, and one of my audition pieces was a bit from Lawrence of Arabia, or it wasn't Lawrence of Arabia, it was Lawrence that was the centerpiece to this particular thing. And it said there was a general after a particularly gruesome event that had gone on, and this general spoke over Lawrence of Arabia, said, "You've got to teach yourself to know yourself as you really are." And it's one of those phrases that stuck with me all through life. I've got to learn to know myself as I really am. And it seems like you've done the work, and I love the psychology element, the mental health element, but also the well-being element. It seems those critical elements that you've got, and I love the joy. And I also noted that you took your cup and made it a chalice at one point, and I love that too. You gave the cup an upgrade. But talking of upgrades, we have a closing tradition, because sadly we are drawing to a close, and as we've all reflected on, we could do this a lot more. I think we could carry on talking for hours. There's so much to delve into, and we should definitely cover the mentor topic at some point. But we have a closing tradition, and that is to hand you the EV Cafe magic wand. With lightning bolt and everything, straight from Harry Potter and modified. But I'm going to pass you the magic wand. Here it comes, and over to you. And that's it. There we go. You've got it. And you get one wish, just one. And I'm sorry, it doesn't play well to ADHD. I know. Squirrel. But you get one wish, and you can do anything you like in particular. I mean, we've had people wanting their own personal chef, to world peace. So anything in between. Feel free. What is it, that one thing that you feel would be really important to mention right now that you can change immediately?
Like you say, my brain, I mean, there's squirrels everywhere here, Paul, to be fair, going all over the place and absolutely scattering. No, you're fine. I think if I keep it relevant to today, right? I think it's really important that conversations like we've had are not had enough. So I think it's really critical. And I take on board the comment around, your thanks for me to opening up. I am, to keep with the same theme, a relatively open book. But I think it's really important that we just have conversations like this, that we talk about people's experiences. We talk about people's challenges in a really non-judgmental way, and a really open forum for that. And that nobody ever feels alone in their grief or challenge or what they're going through. There is always an ear, whether that's any of us or friends, family, colleagues, etc. And that people know that's okay, and people take that opportunity to talk, because it's such a powerful thing to do.
It absolutely is, and I love that. I didn't expect it, but the moment you went there, I just thought that is exactly right, and it's in our gift, isn't it, John? We can continue this and keep this process going, and it's the thing that excites us most. I know we reflect back on some of the conversations we've had, and every now and again, and it's not often, but every now and again, there is a real gem in there, and this is one of those gems in this context, about talking, about being open, about vulnerability, about real people making a real difference for real core reasons, and your true self turning up, and it's thrilling, it's exciting, it's so encouraging, and for you to use the wand in that way today is just well, it's a tribute to you, and I truly believe that you'll make a massive difference for CPD. You're going to make a massive difference for the associations that you're working with. I sense that your son already has an amazing mentor in you, a mentor and a dad, and I'm fully convinced that you are taking that incredibly seriously. But I'm also certain that you will be a great mentor to others as well, with this kind of the way that you're articulating yourself. And I believe maybe even people will reach out from today via LinkedIn, and I know that you're very, very happy to receive those connections. People will share this podcast with others, and please do, and really see a big difference come as a result of today. And of your wish. So, John, what was your final reflections? Yes, I am asking you to sum up now.
Excellent. Thank you kindly. My reflection on today is that it's easy to find people to do business with, as a general rule. It's easy to connect on LinkedIn. It's not always easy to connect. Tom Pearson has an ability to offer himself as a connection, a genuine connection at a personal level. And Tom, I genuinely feel that I've made a new friend. We happen to work in the same industry, but if you and I had sat next to each other at a conference about, I don't know, bananas, I'm pretty sure that somehow we'd have found a way to connect, because that's part of who you are. And I'm very, very grateful to you on a business level, because you've showed me a better way to do business, and on a human level, because you've showed a really fabulous way of being Tom Pearson.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, John.
It's been a delight, and what's been a delight is that, I've known CPD since Cathal really kicked it off back in 2009, probably the very early days, and I know that just from talking to Cathal recently, that he's very happy with the leadership team that he's got, and I know that because he's backed off the business a little bit. He's taking more of that sort of CEO chairperson-y kind of role, and and I'm sure he makes his voice heard regularly, but he's set up a really good business, and he's giving it to you guys to really take forward, to do this 27% compound growth over the next 3 to 5 years. See, I listen. And really take this business forward. And I know, the brilliant reputation that you've built for yourselves around the bodies, now moving on into all of the other things that you mentioned there, from SMR and insurance and all of the things you mentioned. To just rewind everybody and go and listen to that. But also head over to the CPD website. Kind of get the information there. Connect with Tom. Connect with Cathal. Connect with Dave Maguire. The team there will do an amazing job for you. We've seen all of this. The production line that we talked about. The passion of all of the people. That engineering expertise that you can really only find in the northeast of our country, really, that highest level of expertise. We didn't talk upon the little workshop as well, where all the magic happens, and two guys, was it Gary and Andy, work together because nobody knows which one's which. They just get on with it. They're just fabulous people and a great business. Tom, thank you for taking the time today. Thank you for partnering with the EV Cafe as well to champion your message. But I think we're going to get a lot of people reaching out to you, I trust, from this. Any final thoughts from you?
I think I'd reiterate, people want to make genuine connection, and I welcome that. But thanks to both of you for your time this morning, and for using the EV Cafe as a vehicle to move things forward in the way we are. And for CPD to now be a part of that too is, will remain and continue to be exciting for us as we now grow this partnership. So thanks again.
What a wonderful way to end. The EV Cafe, a modified vehicle with CPD.
Oh dear. Well, listen, everybody, I'm sure you've had a lovely time listening to Tom and understanding about him. Which is really important, I think, but also about the brilliant business that is CPD and the world of commercial vehicles that they inhabit and the sustainable way that they're going to be attacking this in the future. Feel free to dive over to the evcafe.org and see all of the podcasts there. You can dive into them from your Apple and Spotify and all of that good stuff, and obviously connect with us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Instagram. We're in all of the usual spots. Do follow us there, and it is important to follow. It really does help. It helps promote this great story and all of the other great stories that we said. We've got about 100. This will be about 126 or 7 or something like that. My goodness, it's a lot of brilliant stories, many of which are very, very encouraging and challenging and celebratory of our industry, which is what we should do. So until next time, everybody, have a great day.